Hi, my name is Bethany Sanft, and today I'm going to be talking about our pectoral girdle as well as our upper limb. So to start off, the pectoral girdle it contains three of our bones. So our clavicle, which is also known as your collarbone, your scapula, also known as your shoulder blade, and then your humerus. So now that we know the names of our um, the proper names of our shoulder blade and our collarbone, we will no longer be using those terms. I will be using clavicle and scapula from now on. So now to go further down our arm, right after the humerus, we have our radius and our ulna, and then we have our hand. So during this time, I'm going to be talking about all the different parts of these bones. And then some injuries, or at the end, I'll talk about some injuries that can occur on our bones. Alright, so before I jump into naming all the different parts of the bones, I'd like to go over a couple of vocabulary words. That way, everything just makes sense as I'm talking about the different parts. So first off, we have articulate. That means to come together. So an example would be like one bone articulating with another bone. And then we also have fossa, which means flat and smooth. So a bone would have like a flat and smooth surface. So it would, the fossa. And then we have process, which is a part of the bone that is sticking out. And then last but not least, we have tuberosity or tubercle, which is a projection or a bump with a rough surface. So it's kind of like a process, but this one has the rough surface. And it's a lot smaller than a process would be. So the first bone I would like to cover is the clavicle. All we truly need to know about the clavicle is that it's there, it's your collarbone, and that we don't really have to know whether it's a right or left bone, just to know that this is our clavicle as you see on this picture here. Alright, so the second bone that I like to talk about is going to be our scapula bone. So on the right, I have a drawing of the anterior side of our scapula, and on the left, I have the posterior side of our scapula. So to begin, on the right side, we have, starting at the top, and that dark green little notch is going to be our superior angle, and that purple notch is going to be our subscapular notch. Right next to the subscapular notch, we have our coracoid process. And then right in front of that coracoid process, we have our acromion process. And the acromion process is going to be in the orange. And in red, we have our spine of the scapula. In the light blue, right above our spine, we're going to have our supraspinous fossa. So that part is going to be pretty smooth, and it kind of curves in a little. You can't really tell or see it in the drawing, but it does kind of curve into the spine. So right below the spine, we have our infraspinous fossa. So again, that one's going to be pretty smooth, and the top of it curves up towards the spine, and then it just continues down our scapula. So the reason behind our spine, the spine of the scapula being the anterior, is because if we had that spine facing our muscles, like that just would not be comfortable, and it would just be poking at our muscles, and we would just be in constant pain. So therefore that spine is going to be on the outside as opposed to the inside. So moving on to our posterior side, as you can see, it's going to be completely smooth. So we have the subscapular fossa, that's going to be in the light brown color. So that again is just flat. So it's just kind of sitting up against our muscles and not really pushing or prodding at it, so we're comfortable. So right above that, again in the green, we have our coracoid process, and again in the orange, we have our acromion process. So that little reddish brown line is going to be our glenoid cavity. It's a bit of a oval-like structure, and that is what articulates with our humerus bone, which I will be talking about after the scapula. So continuing on, we have the superior border that's going to be in the pink. And then to finish off, we have our lateral border in the blue at the bottom. The medial border is in pink, and then our inferior angle of the scapula is going to be the tealish color down at the very bottom of our scapula. And to finish up with the scapula, I just wanted to point out that it is a free floating bone, and it is pretty hard to break, so you wouldn't really have like a broken scapula, but I'll get more into injuries with the scapula later on in the presentation. Alright, so the next bone that I'm going to be talking about, the third one, is our humerus. So that is also a part of our pectoral girdle. Now to start off, at the top in red is going to be the head of the humerus, and right below that on the posterior side, there's going to be this little purple strip, and that's going to be one out of the two necks. So that one's going to be the anatomical neck, and that little ring in orange is going to be our surgical neck. So a little fun fact, when doctors and scientists were coming together and trying to decide like names for everything and figure out what everything was called and what everything's purpose was, they couldn't decide on which neck it should have, what was the true neck of the humerus. Some believed it was the surgical, others believed it was the anatomical, so they just came up with the conclusion to have both necks. So truthfully, a normal human being would not be this isn't going to affect a normal human being. The only people that it truly affects are those learning about it, so me and you, because we have to memorize both of the necks. So anyways, to continue on, in the dark blue on the posterior side on the left, dark blue up at the top, that's going to be the greater tubercle, and then that light blue is going to be the lesser tubercle, and that little pink line in between both of those blues is going to be our intertubercle groove. Now to continue down the humerus bone, in that light green on the anterior side is going to be our deltoid tuberosity. And then on the posterior side, in the dark green at the very bottom, is going to be our lateral epicondyle. And I forgot to mention, on the posterior side, that light green is also the deltoid tuberosity, just from the posterior view of the humerus. So now at the very bottom, that little yellow patch on the anterior side, that's going to be our capitulum. And then on the, same on the anterior view, but this time on the right side of the anterior view, in teal is going to be our medial epicondyle. And then last but not least, our trochlea, which is going to be that little pink spot right there. And that is where our ulna is going to articulate. So as you can see on the posterior side, there's a little bit of the ulna there at the bottom. It's not really colored, but it's there. And yeah, that concludes the humerus. Alright, so the third and fourth bones I'm going to be going over is going to be our radius and our ulna. So the radius here is going to be outlined in purple, and then our ulna is going to be outlined in red. So starting with the ulna, that little blue patch up at the top on the left side, that's going to be the olecranon process. And then at the very bottom of it, we're going to have the styloid process of the ulna. So it's just a little bump that kind of sticks out, and that kind of articulates with our hand and our carpal bones, which we're going to learn about in a few minutes. And now moving on to the trochlear notch, it's going to be located on the left picture, again, up at the very top, that yellow spot, that's going to be our trochlear notch, and that part is what articulates with our humerus, which then creates our elbow. And then that little orange spot there is going to be our coronoid process of the ulna. Now moving on to the radius, as you can see on the right side of the picture in pink, it's a little pink spot, that's going to be our radial notch. So that is where the head of the radius is going to kind of sit against the ulna, right in that little notch right there. It just kind of fits all snug in there. And then we have the radial tuberosity, which is in that brown spot below the pink one. It's going to be a little bump, not a process, but just a little bump, therefore it's a tuberosity. And then all the way at the bottom of that picture, in the light blue, is going to be the Starley process of the radius. So again, it's kind of like the Starley process for the ulna, but this time it's on the radius. So now we've made it to the very end of our upper limb, and that is our hand. So to start from the bottom up, in blue we have our scaphoid, in purple we have our lunate. These are going to be our carpals. So we have a total of 8 carpals, but during this presentation we're only going to focus on 2 of the carpals. So again, that's going to be our scaphoid in blue and our lunate in purple. So a lot of people have said that the scaphoid kind of looks like a boat. In my opinion, I think it just kind of looks like a weird tooth, like with the root and all. But a way I remembered it was a scaphoid is because it's pretty close with our thumb. It's like right under our thumb, where the lunate is kind of right under our pinky. So our lunate, it gets its name from lunar, meaning moon, because it does tend to look like a crescent moon. From this angle, or in this picture, it doesn't necessarily look like a moon, but when you look at the anterior side, you can definitely tell that it does have that moon shape to it. So those are our carpals, and then in green are going to be our metacarpals. So meta means beyond, so therefore they would be beyond the carpals, and therefore we have metacarpals. So in order to know which metacarpal we're talking about, we're going to start off with the thumb. That's going to be 1, and then 2 is your pointer finger, 3 is your middle finger, 4 is your ring, and then 5 would be your pinky. But when writing them down, you would have to write them in Roman numerals as opposed to like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then moving up in the yellow, the red, orange, and yellow, those are going to be our phalanges and our thumb. So our thumb is actually not a finger because it only has 2 bones, where the rest of our fingers have the 3 bones that you can see in this picture. So yeah, that's why it is called a thumb and not a finger. So if anyone were to say, like, how many fingers am I holding up, and they have their whole hand, if you were to say 5, that would technically be wrong because your thumb isn't considered a finger. But anyway, so in the yellow is going to be the proximal phalange, and the orange up in 2, 3, 4, and 5 is going to be the middle phalange, and then the red in all 5 of our digits is going to be our distal phalange. And now that concludes all the parts of the pectoral girdle and the upper limb. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about some breaks, or not necessarily breaks, but more injuries that can occur. Alright, so one of the first injuries I would like to talk about is going to be a separated shoulder. So this picture is a picture of an x-ray of a separated shoulder. So basically what this means is that the tendons and or ligaments between the clavicle and scapula tear, and because there is a tear, these 2 bones separate from each other, causing a lot of pain and discomfort, and just really just causing the scapula and the clavicle to separate from each other. And the next injury I would like to talk about is a dislocated shoulder. So a dislocated shoulder is different from a separated shoulder because a dislocated shoulder occurs when the ligaments or tendons get torn, and it causes the humerus to pop out of the glenoid cavity, so out of its socket, which that can be put back into place. It can be a bit painful to pop the humerus back into its socket, but it is doable and the patient will be all right. But it is likely to happen again if, some force were to be applied, or if the person kind of tried hard enough to move their shoulder a certain way, and maybe it'll just pop out a little bit. But yeah, so that's the difference between a dislocated shoulder and a separated shoulder. So the picture here is now the dislocated shoulder. Alright, so the final injury and final topic that I'm going to be going over today is going to be a separated elbow. So a separated elbow is when the ulna gets separated from the humerus. So the humerus and the ulna, they articulate, which then creates your elbow. But if there's too much pressure and tension being pulled between the ulna and the humerus, then it causes a separated elbow. So therefore it's really common in kids because their bones aren't fully formed yet, so they're not strong enough to withstand the weight and the pressure of these two bones being kind of pulled apart. Alright, so that will now conclude my presentation on the pectoral girdle and the upper limb. Thank you so much for listening and watching. I really hope this has helped. And if there are any questions, feel free to ask and I can most definitely answer them for you. But thank you once again for watching and listening. I hope to teach you about a new region of the body soon.